the Eagles are out there. In
They
Anaheim.
are
I
out
wonder if
there.
they're at that was Nelson Aguilar at the Gentleman's Club.
No,
Didn't he get in trouble for that last year?
I'm sure they're all behaving by now. You hope. Knock on wood.
John, wasn't that Aguilar last year that got a little trouble for that?
It was Aguilar who went straight from mini camp to cheerleaders.
Well, every day
right
after
down the
practice,
street.
he's going to be very tempted if that place is still open.
Fletcher Cox was also there, Connor Barwin. But they,
Fletcher Cox has enough problems going on.
not the greatest moment in Eagles history, but
But how difference a year makes, right?
That's correct.
A couple things about this game that we want to touch on. One, Pete's been kind of talking about his big thing. You're out there all week. You're in the plush hotels. He seems to have some concern that you can't mentally prepare for a game under such five-star circumstances.
Only because that was the issue that they brought up of why they might have lost to Seattle, that they didn't prepare right, John.
Yeah, well, now I think that's the unique part of football, and that's what in a lot of ways makes football different than the other sports, because you have so much time between games. You start to overthink things, and obviously only after the Eagles lost, then you start to hear the whispers of they had bad practices during the week, and really they claim the week before against Chicago, and all of a sudden you have these penalty-ridden games, these mistake-ridden games. Didn't matter against the Bears because they were such a bad football team, but against Seattle, obviously, it mattered a lot. So, hey, I don't know how much I believe that, to be honest, because, as I said, I think you start to think about things in the NFL. It's just the nature of the beast. When you have so many days between games, it's not like baseball where you can immediately forget it. You're on the field the next day playing another game. You just constantly mull this stuff over. I look at that game against Seattle, and again, you're facing a very, very unique player in Russell Wilson. He gave you a lot of issues. I don't think you need to go much farther than that. I really don't. You do need to clean up the penalties and the stuff you can clean up, but I wouldn't exactly be pushing the panic button and worried about how this team prepares, because they've done a good job for the vast majority of the season.
Yeah, we hear all those phrases, flush it out of our system or move on to the next game, but you're right. In football, the length of the time leading up to the next game is what gives us, the people, the opportunity to talk about concern about preparation and stuff. Mike and I talked about the difference between, so they're coming off of Russell Wilson and then now going to a Jared Goff, and they couldn't be two more different type of quarterbacks.
No, they couldn't. Russell's really unique. I talked about it a lot. So there's not a lot of comparables to him in the league, just because he plays the position in such a strange fashion. It's not something you can teach. It's certainly not something you would advocate a young player to play like that. It's almost like Steph Curry in the NBA, where he pulls up and knocks down a 30-footer. Now, if you're trying to teach a kid how to play basketball, you say that's a terrible shot, but not when Steph Curry's taking it. And that's kind of similar with Russell Wilson. You can't teach young quarterbacks to play like him because they can't do what he can do. Jared Goff is going to be more traditional, and Sean McVay has done a wonderful job sort of reclaiming his career and getting him back on the right track. And it's going to be really interesting, because what the Rams do is they're almost like a college offense. If you ever watch college games, you'll see the quarterbacks look off to the sideline, get the play from the coach as he looks at the defense, and then runs the play. That's sort of what the Rams do, but they use the communication system. So Sean McVay stays in Jared Goff's ear all the way up to the 15-second limit. So the key to this game is going to be Jim Schwartz has to tell his defense, look, you can't declare, you can't let Sean McVay see what you're going to do early in the play clock, because that's when the Rams are going to slice and dice you. If you can wait, and you wait to that 15-second mark to declare, and the communication is cut off, I think you're going to cause a lot of problems for Jared Goff.
Yeah, that was a topic of conversation on whether or not they were kind of breaking the rules or how they were kind of, doing this. But we hear this a lot about different quarterbacks. I know Barrett tells the story all the time about how Bobby Hoying, when he had Gruden would basically tell him, you're going to take 3 steps and throw it to this guy, and he'll be open. When Dana Bible took over, that wasn't being told, and guys had problems. So is this suggesting that Goff is being kind of instructed in a similar fashion, or not so much?
No, it does. I mean, it was clear during his rookie season, and the real big difference for the Eagles when they were doing their due diligence, and the reason they like Carson Wentz better, is because he was so far ahead of Jared Goff when it came to running a pro-style offense and having some of the skills. You still have to obviously improve them and coach them up, but he was a far ahead of the curve as far as doing what typical NFL quarterbacks do. Jared was in that bear raid system at Cal, basically not asked to do anything an NFL quarterback is asked to. But what he does have is a great skill set. So McVay has sort of seen what he can do well, and he gets in his ear, and he tells him what to do. And he's not breaking the rules. You're allowed to communicate up to that 15 seconds. The fact that he's done it and nobody else has figured it out, that's not his fault. He deserves credit for that. But I think you saw a couple weeks ago when the Rams went into Minnesota, I think that's what Jim Schwartz will be looking at. Another great defensive mind in Mike Zimmer. He figured it out. He realized what was going on, and he made sure his defense, as I said, didn't declare their intentions early in the play clock, and the Rams had just tons of trouble. I think you're going to see sort of the Eagles use that blueprint.
So, John, if the Eagles had the number 1 pick that year, do they still take Wentz?
Oh, no question. The Eagles wanted Carson Wentz. 100%. That's the guy they wanted. If they had the first pick, they would have picked Carson Wentz, and it wasn't close.
Well, let me ask you this. How many teams would have gone Goff over Wentz, do you think? I mean, not that we documentally know this, but was the consensus that Goff was over Wentz because he was the bigger school guy, or were people surprised that the Rams liked Goff over Wentz?
No, Goff would have been taken by more teams. He was the consensus number 1 pick. He would have been the guy. If all 32 teams had an opportunity, more would have taken Goff than Wentz. And it generally comes down to skill set. But the Eagles felt a different direction. They felt because of what Carson ran in college, and it's turned out, in hindsight, it's turned out to be correct. Goff probably has a better skill set overall as far as throwing the football, and he's got more mobility than people give him credit for. So from just arm talent alone, more people like Goff, but that's why the NFL draft is not an exact science. The Eagles focused in on their guy, and it turns out that Philadelphia was right, but that's not to say that the Rams don't have something with Jared Goff as well.
John, how do you think the Rams have turned things around so fast? Is it the coach? Is it Goff and the talent level? I mean, what do you think's been the biggest key to their turnaround, or all the keys to their turnaround?
Well, it's definitely the coaching. I mean, they've had some talent on other positions, obviously. Aaron Donald, I talk about all the time, might be the best interior defender in the NFL. In fact, take out the might, he is. Todd Gurley's a tremendous running back. They've revamped their offensive line, bringing in Andrew Whitworth especially, which has helped them a lot at left tackle. But there's no question it's the coaching. And that is the comparison you also have to make. As we always talk about, Carson Wentz came in here and he had Doug Peterson and Frank Reich, who both played the position for over a decade. He had John DeFilippo, who played the position in college. Jared Goff walked into a situation where he had Jeff Fisher as the head coach, a defensive-minded secondary guy. Rob Boris was the offensive coordinator. He was an offensive line guy. So they didn't do a good job sort of building up a similar incubator that the Eagles did. And now that they've shifted gears and Les Snead deserves a lot of credit for this, and he brought in offensive-minded people. They've sort of broken it down, see what Jared does well, and as I said, now they're on a really, really positive direction.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, at JF McMullen. We didn't get a chance to talk about this a lot yesterday because Peterson had not spoken yet, but last night about the illegal forward pass, which seemingly, looked like a play that would have been overturned. What is the kind of – how does he get that information? Is there someone that's hired for that? Is it just coaches that work upstairs that are doing other things that happen to have to look at that as well? Who's in charge of kind of being that guy? Because yesterday, Peterson kind of indicated that, we're playing hypothetical here. It's kind of 50-50. It doesn't sound like they had their ducks in a row on a play like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have to understand it does happen very quickly in an NFL game, so you have to make a decision in that sort of 15 or 20-second realm, especially if a team is trying to hurry up. So you can either throw the flag, you can either call a timeout. You can't sit and wait for, as Doug said, you can't bring out the protractors. You can't look at the replays again and again and again when it goes to commercial. Unless you do call a timeout. There's no question they should have thrown the flag. But as I mentioned yesterday on the show, it was a lot closer than people think it is, and I'm still not sure they would have overturned it. And I think the Torrey Smith play, the spot foul, is very, very similar because that looked obvious as well, and they didn't overturn it. And, it's sort of this mentality. Remember, the replay system has changed. It's no longer Dean Blandino's who's at Fox, and it's Al Riveron and two other people doing it. And the NFL hasn't been nearly as consistent last year. If you told me this was the year before and Dean Blandino was doing it, I would have told you, no question, it was getting overturned. 100%, because whether you like Dean Blandino or not, he's very, very consistent. And if you watched him, if you listened to him, you could tell what he was going to rule in plays. I would get him at basically 90+% because he was very consistent. This group is not consistent. I don't think by any stretch of the imagination it was a home run. But Ryan Pagnazzi and are these people that it's not their only job, but it's their job to get the information to Doug as quickly as possible. They thought it wasn't going to be overturned. I thought it was at least a 50-50 shot at the bare minimum. And at that point of the game, in that key situation, you have to throw the red flag.
It's seeming, the way that press conference went last night, John, it was that play was the be-all, end-all of that game.
Well, it turns out it was. I mean, that drive essentially sealed the game. Remember, the Eagles had closed it to a touchdown. It's a one-score game. If you force a punt, you have a chance to tie. So essentially it flipped it and sealed the game. But, yeah, it's never one specific thing. You could go back early in the game to overthrow the Nelson Aguilar. That's probably a touchdown. The Eagles left so much on the field, you can't say if Doug would have thrown the flag. And by the way, how about this? How about the officials throw the flag on field? How about they throw a yellow flag and get it right from the get-go?
Right. How did they miss it? Because at the very least,
well, it didn't look to the naked eye. It did look like a lateral. It really did. To me, it certainly did, to the naked eye. Only when you slowed it down did it all of a sudden look like, oh, that might be a forward pass. So I'm not going to kill him for that, actually. I'm just saying when people start looking back and we go back, what I was discussing with Pete, the time between the games, you want to sort of nip at all the minutia of it, and that's part of it, certainly that play call, but it happens every week in the NFL. You have to overcome things like that. The Eagles weren't able to overcome it. Think of it this way. There's no rule to say, okay, Doug made a mistake. He didn't throw the flag. The officials made a mistake. They didn't throw the flag. But there's no rule to say you have to let Seattle score. So the Eagles could have made a play defensively from that point. They didn't. And generally, good teams overcome this kind of stuff. The Eagles have done it more often than not this season. In Seattle, which is a very difficult place to play, they weren't able to overcome those kinds of mistakes.
Hey, John, a minute ago you talked about missing Aguilar on that throw, and Wentz, I'm sure, knows that he has some throws that he'd like back. I've seen some of the national media throw out the debate that Jared Goff is a better technical thrower of the football, that he puts the ball on his receivers better than Wentz does. Are you buying any of that argument that Goff is a better technical thrower of the football?
Yeah, I think that's what I was kind of talking about with arm talent. I think he throws the football better and more naturally. But there's a lot of guys. I mean, there are a lot of guys that can throw the football really, really well, throw nice balls. It doesn't necessarily mean they're great quarterbacks. In this instance, I think you have a great quarterback in Carson Wentz and somebody who's got the potential to get there in Jared Goff. But certainly just from a pure aesthetic standpoint, Jared throws the ball in a nicer fashion than Carson, but Carson's the better quarterback. So, I'm not sure what that means.
Talk with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Of course, the Eagles getting ready for the Rams, and they're hanging out there in L.A. all week long. We'll have countdown to kickoff coverage beginning at 1 o'clock on Sunday for the 4:25 start. A couple of NFL news and notes, John. You wrote about the context of a bad night for the NFL, an ugly game last night that was described by some as AFC North football, but it was more than that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there were a lot of things. There were the number of penalties, the hits that were very violent and turned a lot of people in a negative direction. And then obviously the biggest thing of all was the Ryan Shazier injury, which was just awful in every phase. And I when people start complaining about Juju Smith-Schuster or hits from George Aloka, who both got suspended for one game today, I can't even get past the Shazier thing. But look, I think the NFL is making a mistake by suspending players for these types of hits. And it's a very, very slippery slope. As you mentioned, I wrote about it today. I think it's bizarre that people think, somebody like Schuster or the worst part of the Schuster hit was the taunting afterwards. To assume that he or Iloka could make those kinds of decisions in split-second fashion in the speed of an NFL game, it's absurd. It really is. And I wish every fan could be on the field to watch an NFL game for at least a couple plays and see how fast it goes. And because there's a whole group of people that think it's a video game and they think these guys can stop on a dime. And it doesn't work that way. So I've always stated from the beginning, the NFL needs to stipulate this is a very, very violent game. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And occasionally these things are going to happen. Now, if you want to have the discussion that you want to ban the sport because it's too violent, I'll have that discussion with you, but don't be hypocritical about it. And so many people are. George Iloka is not a dirty player. Either is Juju Smith-Schuster. And I saw people on Twitter wanting to ban, guys, a 21-year-old kid for a peel back block that was basically 6 inches away from being legal. That's absurd to me.
That's a play that block is a play that you used to see all the time and say that's a great block, the Schuster block.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, the fact that he stood over top of Burst.
Yeah, that part's not good.
Yeah.
I mean, Chuck Bednarik did that to Frank Gifford, right? And it was okay.
Yeah. And he should be fined for the taunting aspect of it. I have no problem with that. But to be suspended, as I said, for missing your target by 6 inches in the speed of an NFL game.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the same with using your helmet, helmet-to-helmet hits. That stuff is when you started to make the tackle, the guy was at one place, and then the speed, the whole thing's a mess. The way that they're policing these things, but safety first, right? I mean, that's what it comes down to. Safety is number one.
Yeah, and again, it's kind of hypocritical because people want to enjoy this sport and feel like these guys aren't putting themselves at risk. Well, they are. I mean, they are. So you either like the sport or you don't like the sport. And in a lot of ways, that's what's happened to boxing, which at one time was arguably, in Muhammad Ali's day, was arguably the most high-profile sport in the country, at least for big fights. And now it's virtually dead. So the NFL has a lot to worry about as far as safety issues.
Yes, they do. At JF McMullen, more on this, of course, on our website, 973ESPN.com. Johnny Mac live every day here on the Sports Bash, brought to you by Geno's, the winemaker's choice for 50 years. Visit Gino Pinto on the White Horse Pike in Hamilton, online, GinoPinto.com. Gino, the winemaker's choice